Hello Revolution, and welcome to another week of us doing Rev Online. I hope you're all staying safe and doing well. Tonight we have a worship with Kyle and we have a lesson from TV. I hope you stick around to the end and I will see you later. Bye!
Hey everyone, I am so excited to announce that youth ministry is officially back in person starting on July 1st. Starting then on Wednesday nights from 6:30 to 7:30, we're going to have what we're calling weekly student hangouts, a chance for us to gather together, enjoy some snacks, games, a lesson, and most importantly, community together in person so we can see each other and be with one another. Now, to honor some social distancing guidelines and to honor some CDC health procedures, these nights are going to look a little different. We're going to be posting more about what this looks like, but here's the most important thing you need to know. To lower the exposure rate, to lower the crowd size, we're going to do some alternating weeks for middle school and high schoolers. That means middle schoolers on July 1st, it's your night to come here in person. And high schoolers, July 8th is your night. We're still going to offer some online live streaming or pre-recorded options for you to be able to hang out in, and this is just one big step towards reopening fully, hopefully, by the school year. We love you. We're going to post some more things throughout the week for you to know. We love you, and we're so excited to see you again in person starting July 1st.
Open wide from the depths and from the heights, I will bring a sacrifice. And with these hands lifted high, hear my song, hear my cry. I will bring a sacrifice. I will bring the sacrifice. And I lay me down, I'm not my own. I belong to you alone. Lay me down, lay me down. And on my heart this much is true. There's no life apart from you. My pride, giving up all my rights. Take this life and let it shine, shine, shine. Take this life and let it shine. It'll be my joy to say your will, your way. And it'll be my joy to say your will, your way. And it'll be my joy to say your will, your way, always. And it'll be my joy to say your will, your way. And it'll be my joy to say your will, your way. And it'll be my joy to say your will,
Well, for the past few weeks, we've been in this series called More Than a Hashtag. We've been having a conversation about what justice looks like as a follower of Jesus. And I have to go off script a little bit now and share with you a certain hashtag that I have let's just say a love-hate relationship with. And it's this hashtag right here. That's right, the humble brag. Yeah, now if you're like me and you know what humble brag is, you probably have the love-hate relationship too. But if you don't know what a humble brag is, let me explain. See, a humble brag is when somebody posts something online that at first seems quite innocent, or humble if you will. But actually when you read into it is really them bragging about themselves. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what a humble brag could sound like. A humble brag could be like, "Oops, I'm such a klutz. I tripped up the stairs while accepting my Oscar." You can see the brag in there, right? Or maybe, how about this one? "I cannot believe that not cute selfie of me got over 10,000 likes. I'm so surprised, hashtag blessed." You can see the theme of these, right? These are instances where people are trying to appear humble in what they're saying, but really there's an element of arrogance or bragging in there. Now, the reason I have a love-hate relationship with humble brag is quite honestly because they're entertaining to read, as cringeworthy as they are. But the hate part of this is I know that I've been guilty of doing this too. I think we all have. And we're going to talk about this idea of humility today. And humility, it would have been a great way to start this series about justice, but it's also a great way to end it too. Because when we think about how humility and justice fit together, let's think of it this way. That when we think of injustice and justice as being two sides of the spectrum, I think we also need to think of humility and, well, not being humble, arrogance, pride, or whatever word you want to use, as being two opposite ends of the spectrum. See, the idea of injustice, when something is unjust or unjust, it's us putting our own selfish pride, our own selfish desires and needs above the needs of others. This is not being humble. But when we think about what we've been reading about, what we've been talking about, and acting in a just way, when we do things out of love and kindness and care for others, well, that's quite simply showing humility, being humble. Now, word of warning for you. See, humility, this isn't how we're naturally wired. We're not actually wired to put others before ourselves, or really to place us beneath others. If anything, our human nature has wired us to do what we can to get ahead, to do what we can to look out for me, myself, and I above anyone else. So humility is not something that's automatic. It's something that doesn't happen subconsciously. It's something that we need to have trained and consciously think about in our lives. It requires checking ourselves and doing a little self-inventory of how we're doing on being humble and showing humility to others. And humility, it's a huge part of justice. I want to invite us now to take a look at this verse we've been looking at for the past few weeks. It comes from Micah. It's Micah 6:8. I encourage you, by the way, maybe since we've been talking about this verse, it's really stuck out to you, it's one you really like. I encourage you, maybe take the time to memorize this verse if you haven't already. It can be a great one to just sort of have in your head and be thinking about and challenge yourself with as situations arise and as things come up in your life. So let's read together now Micah 6:8. It says this: "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Now, we've been familiar with these three things that we've been talking about, that Micah specifically says: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. And today I want to finish out this series by having us talk about that last one, walking humbly with God. And how do we do that? What does that look like to walk humbly with God? We might know what humility is, of placing ourselves beneath others, but what does that look like when it comes to walking with God humbly? And I want to invite us to look at a couple different verses that we're going to look at, a couple different passages in the New Testament. And the first one is in the book of Philippians. And in this, the author of Philippians, his name's Paul, he's describing how, just like we talked about with mercy, that humility is actually best defined or described by seeing how it's the embodiment of Jesus, how Jesus himself is humility. Now I want to draw our attention to a few verses here of how we can see humility lived out in Jesus. So this comes from Philippians 2, starting at verse 3. It says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even on a cross. Now, you might have seen the word in there, humility or humble, a few times. And I want to draw your attention to what Paul is saying here. Because Paul is saying, so where do we see humility? Where do we see this attribute of humility in Jesus? Well, it's by his very mission. It's due to the fact that he was at the right hand of God up in heaven. And he came off of that throne down to earth, humbled himself to come to earth, humbled himself as a servant on earth, thinking about the life that Jesus led, and then humbled himself to even die. And Paul even emphasizes even death on a cross. It's not that just he came to earth and died. He died by getting crucified on a cross. See, the very nature, the very life of Jesus is a life of humility. And if we want to zoom this out even further, this action that Jesus took, this death and resurrection of Jesus, it is in and of itself. It's an act of justice, it's an act of humility, and it's an act of mercy. See, it's an act of justice because by doing that, Jesus allowed those who put their faith in him to have their wrongs righted by God. It's this definition of justice we've been talking about, to make wrong things right. And Jesus' death allows us, by faith in him, to have our wrongs righted by God. So it's an act of justice. But it's an act of mercy. Because this death that Jesus died for us, it allows us to not experience the punishment that we should have deserved. Remember our definition of mercy. Mercy is not getting what you do deserve. And we deserve, because of our sin and our actions, we deserve a life that is not saved by grace, but instead is punishable. And because of Jesus' death, that punishment, we now have mercy for that. But it's also humility. In the very way that Jesus humbled himself to go from heaven to earth as a servant and dying a death that he was guiltless about. He didn't do anything wrong, but he died on the cross anyways. See, this is the kind of person who Jesus is. He embodies this idea of humility. And he calls us to model our lives after it as well. I want to look at another passage real quick. This is a story about Jesus and his followers. And in this story, Jesus is talking to his followers, and he starts telling the story about how there are going to be two groups, years down the line, when Jesus comes back and there's this final judgment that happens. There's going to be two groups of people, the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And Jesus goes on to describe first the sheep. And he goes on to describe that this group of sheep, that they saw Jesus when he was hungry and gave him something to eat. That they saw Jesus when he was thirsty and gave him something to drink. They saw Jesus when he was naked and they gave him clothes. They saw Jesus when he was in prison and they visited him. They saw Jesus when he was a stranger and they welcomed him in. And then as he's telling the story, Jesus goes, and then the sheep, the followers, are going to go, well, what do you mean, Jesus? We never saw you in any of these instances. But then Jesus says something that I think changes the way that we view justice, changes the way that we view humility in our lives. He says this, "The king will reply, 'Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" I want you to catch this. See, when Jesus was describing how you saw me hungry and you gave me something to eat, you saw me thirsty and gave me something to drink, and so on, he wasn't talking about necessarily himself, about Jesus himself sitting on the side of the road being hungry. He was talking about all of the people that his followers locked eyes with and doing something to help them, to help make their wrongs right. See, Jesus was talking about this idea of humility, how it's not just for him and doing something for him, but it's doing something not just doing something for ourselves either, but it's doing something for others. It's helping others and having an eye for how we can help those that need help the most. And then Jesus goes on to describe that other group. Remember, that's the sheep. And then Jesus goes on to describe this other group, the goats. And he says how the goats, they saw the same thing. They saw Jesus on the side of the road needing something to eat, and Jesus needing a drink and needing to be welcomed in and being in prison and all these things. But the difference is the goats didn't do anything. The goats didn't act on it. And then Jesus, at the very end of the story, he says a pretty bold statement. He says that the sheep, those that saw that and acted, the sheep are the ones that are going to inherit eternal life. And the goats, the ones who saw it and didn't act, are going to inherit eternal punishment. Now, I don't say this to scare you. I say this to prove a point that to emphasize the point that Jesus is making, that we've been talking about for a few weeks now. This idea that a real, genuine faith in God, a real, genuine faith in Jesus, when we give our lives and say yes to following Him, it should lead us to some action. It should lead us to this very thing where we see those in need, see people that have wrongs in their life, and us acting to do what we can to help make them right. It's the very act of justice, and Jesus calls us to live a life that focuses on helping make the wrongs right of others. Can we do everything? Absolutely not. We talked about that a few weeks ago. That we can't solve everything. It's not on you to solve everything. But it is on you to, as Jesus pointed out, to do something. We talked about the first week. And for as amazing and perfectly as Jesus lived this out, there's another person I think of in life that's human, just like me and you, had flaws herself, although maybe not as many as me for sure. And that's Mother Teresa. See, Mother Teresa, she was a Roman Catholic nun, and she also was a missionary. And she felt called to serve the people of India. And she lived her life in poverty to help do lots of things, to help make lots of wrongs right for the people of India. She helped with orphanages, she helped with schooling, she helped with education, she helped with lots, just providing people with food. And she did many things. And she talked about how she takes this story from Jesus, if you will, this mission from Jesus to see Him and to feed Him, how she lives that out with others. And I want to read you a quote that she gave. It'll be on the screen as well. She said, "I see Jesus in every human being. I say to myself, this is hungry Jesus. I must feed him. This is sick Jesus. This one has leprosy or gangrene. I must wash and tend to him. I serve because I love Jesus." See, Mother Teresa, she certainly dedicated her life and lived her life serving the least of these. And she literally lived out the words that Jesus has called all of His followers to live out. To make the wrongs right that we can see. This is how God is a God of justice. This is how Jesus lived out this life of justice. And these actions, what Jesus has called us to do, it calls us to humility. It calls us to put the needs of others above the needs of ourselves. It calls us to have an eye for when things aren't right with others and to actually follow up and do something about it. Now, here's what I know for me. I know this can be hard sometimes. Like I said, we're not automatically wired to be humble. This is something we have to check ourselves and remind ourselves of. And here's what I know for me personally, and this might be true for you. That the times in my life when I do best at this, the times in my life where I'm really living out this humility that Jesus calls me to live, it's when I'm reminded of the mercy and the love and the grace and the humility that Jesus showed to me. See, when I'm doing my best to be humble, when you're doing your best to be humble, I can't help but think, what would it look like to remind yourself of the mercy that God has shown you? What would it look like to remind yourself of how Jesus lived His life going from heaven to earth for you? He died on the cross with you in mind. What would it look like to remind yourself of this amazing, extravagant grace and mercy and love and humility that God showed to you, and then you in turn can show just a fraction of that to other people? Here's a question I want to challenge you to ask, to maybe check yourself, to take a self-inventory on how you're doing with this. Here's the question. Who am I putting before myself? Who am I putting before myself? If you can answer this, I want to tell you that there's a good chance that you are living a life of humility. That you're thinking of a person or a situation or something that you've placed before you, to where your needs aren't your top priority, but it's helping someone else that is. If you can't answer this, maybe you can't answer this question. You can't think of a single person or something that comes to mind that you're putting before yourself. I don't want to shame you or anything. I instead want to challenge you to identify someone or something that you can put before your own needs. Who is it or what is it that you can place yourself beneath? The idea of humility, the idea of surrender. What is that? What does that look like? Because when we're able to place ourselves beneath someone else. Not in an unhealthy way, but in a healthy way that honors God and lives out this call to justice. We become Jesus with skin on. We become this embodiment of who Jesus is, not so that we get the glory and we get the praise, but so that other people can know about a God that loves them most and best by the way we love people, the way that we can. So throughout this series, the series is titled More Than a Hashtag. And throughout this series, we've talked about a few different things that we can do. We talked about the importance of just doing something. We talked about the importance of loving mercy, of how we can act justly last week, and then this week about how we can walk humbly with God. And here's what I want to leave you with before we close. It's real easy to let this series be a big deal now for this past month, and then it's easy for us to sort of drift back into our normal routine. For us to not think about a hashtag that's circulating, or to get back into our normal rhythm of life, or our new normal rhythm of life after quarantine. And it's easy for us to just sort of drift back into what we've known and to forget about all that we've talked about and not make justice a priority in our life anymore. And I just want to challenge you in these days, and as we close out this series, to think about what is it that you can do to position yourself to still continue to do these things, to do something, to love mercy, to act justly, and to walk humbly. In the days and months after this series is over, the days and months after a hashtag stops trending, in the days and months after our news media has moved on to something else, what can you do to still live out this call, this God-given call, to live a life of justice? Not where we're solving everyone's wrongs and every wrong in the world, but where we're helping to make wrong things right so that people will know about a God that loves them most and best. Will you join me in not just living a life of justice right now, but making it more than a hashtag, and live out this life of justice as a follower of Jesus? Would you pray with me? God, we know that this call to live a life of justice, it sounds really big and daunting and overwhelming. And God, for some of us, we might still not be sure where to start or how to do this or what this looks like. And God, for some of us, we might realize today that we haven't been very humble in the way we've lived our lives. And God, I ask right now for a couple things. I ask for your help. I ask just for your guidance for anyone that might be wondering what they need to do next. What's their next best step? God, I ask that you would help reveal that to them, whether it be through a conversation or through something else. God, we ask that you would just help reveal to others what is their next best step. And God, I also ask that for those of us that might be struggling with humility, for those of us that might have realized our pride is a little bit more of a problem than we thought, God, we ask for your help with this as well. God, whether we need a gentle nudge to realize that this might be an issue, whether we need peace to know that we can change, it doesn't have to be like this all the time. God, whether we just need the encouragement from a friend or a leader or a mentor on how to do this, God, we ask that you provide those things for us now. That you be with us, continue to guide us, even after this series is over, to continue helping to make wrong things right with your help so that other people may know you. God, it's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks for watching.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed the lesson tonight as much as I did, and I also hope that you stick around for the rest of the week to see what else we have planned. Make sure you follow us on all of our social medias to stay updated and involved in our church, and I'm really excited to see you guys soon. I miss you!